Hello and welcome to The Wrap, WRAL's political podcast. I am your host this week, state government reporter Will Doran, and I am here with my colleague Paul Spey. It's been a week, hasn't it?
It was only a week? Feels like a month sometimes. Every week during election season feels like a month.
Yes. Obviously, some of the biggest news this week was Mark Robinson suing CNN for $50 million. Paul, you and I have done several stories on this, and we'll get to that later. But I wanted to start off because we're recording this on Friday, and yesterday, Thursday, was the start of early voting, and we heard from the State Board of Elections that North Carolina set a new record for turnout on the first day of early voting, and that broke the record set in 2020 when, over the course of the entire election, we set new records for voter turnout. So there was a lot of concern from some politicians and activists heading into this race that voter enthusiasm wasn't going to be nearly as high as it was in 2020, that a lot of people might just stay home, say, I'm just kind of fed up with politics, I don't really like either candidate. But if we're sitting here breaking records, that seems to maybe not be the case.
Right, and I think a lot of that changed after President Joe Biden dropped off the ticket. We heard a lot of people say they didn't want to redo like that. No one seemed to care very much about that. Maybe Trump supporters did, but even Biden backers, people in the Democratic Party seemed to really worry that they could get people to the polls if he was the nominee. And so, yesterday we saw record numbers, and there were lines at some polling places, including the one I tried to go to Thursday morning. But I used Wake County's weight tracker, and instead of waiting in line for more than 30 minutes, I went about 2 miles down the road to a different polling site, hopped in line, and I was in and out in 15. So that's one thing. If you're listening to this in North Carolina, check and see if your elections board has come up with this basically called a weight tracker, where they update on their website an estimated wait time at each location. I think Wake has it. Who else has it?
Yeah, not every county has this. I know that Durham and Orange counties also have it. I believe a few others do, but I know that it's not every county. Obviously in North Carolina on election day, you need to go to your specific precinct. So, you're kind of, buttonholed in there. But during early voting, you can go to any of the voting sites in your county and cast a ballot at any of those sites you want. So these wait time trackers are awesome for that reason. Because I saw a map of the Durham one on Thursday, and there were, a couple of polling places that had, like hour and a half, 2 hour long wait times, and then some other places that had like 10-minute wait times. Mm-hmm. So you can, and like in your case, they weren't really that far apart from each other in some cases.
No, they're literally 2 miles apart, and one was closer to downtown, and it had a much longer line than the YMCA I went to. That was a little closer to the Belt Line and away from the city. But hey,
if you can save an hour of your day just by going online to your county elections board website and checking that before you head out, that's a pretty good tool.
Right. Even if you account for my drive time from one site to the other, my experience was much shorter than it would have been at the first place I went.
Exactly. So go online, go to your county board of elections website. You can at least see the different sites and their hours that they're open. And maybe if you live in a county that has put the money towards setting up one of those wait time trackers, you can see that as well. In the meantime, candidates, the presidential campaigns are all in on North Carolina. Bill Clinton was in Durham and on Charlotte Thursday for the start of early voting with Tim Walz, Kamala Harris's running mate. The Trump campaign has a bus tour that has been going all across the state. They started out over in the Charlotte suburbs. They hit up the Triad area. They hit Raleigh. Now they're in eastern North Carolina, and they've been trying to pump people up. And then Trump himself is going to be here on Monday in Asheville and in Greenville, kind of hopping from one side of the state to the other, doing some speeches in both western and eastern North Carolina. So, all eyes on North Carolina here as early voting starts. Meanwhile, let's talk about some voting conspiracies, because I saw you are our PolitiFact reporter, and I saw PolitiFact had a story about the Helene voting conspiracies, and then we saw Friday morning some of our members of Congress put out a letter asking for basically, I think it was a CIA briefing, right, on how much Russia and China might have been involved in some of this misinformation spreading around Helene, and whether or not, politics played a role in the lack of perceived response.
Right. So, and this is not North Carolina. Members of North Carolina's congressional delegation sent a letter to a leader in the U.S. intelligence community saying, "Hey, can we have a meeting and talk about where a lot of this disinformation is coming from?" Because they're seeing posts about FEMA, about Governor Cooper, about resources that are available, and they're concerned. And they're not the only ones. The ones who signed the letter are Democrats, but they're not the only ones we've seen raise concerns about it. On October 3rd, which was closer to the actual flooding, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, who is a big Republican, told reporters there's some belief, he was vague here, he said there's some belief and understanding that misinformation is coming from foreign sources, just to confuse people on the ground about what's happening here. And I'm sort of paraphrasing his quote. And now we should point out, this has not been confirmed just yet. This is not, people have not pointed the finger at America's adversaries like Russia and China. But as we note in our story online on WRALnews.com in the PolitiFact section, misinformation experts have pinpointed misinformation to Russia and China after previous natural disasters, even like the wildfires in Hawaii. And so there's a big concern about what their motives are, what they could see next. And it makes sense that some of our lawmakers are going to go to the intelligence community and say, hey, help us out here. Tell us what to prepare for.
Yeah, and I'll say as someone who spends a decent amount of time on social media, looking at these things for work, I've seen a decent amount of posts that directly tied, the Maui fire to the Helene response, and not saying that those absolutely are the work of foreign governments, but if we already know that they were involved in things as recently as 2022 or 2023, I believe, when that was.
Just last year, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, we know that, there's plenty of foreign work on social media just with, trying to spread chaos with the election in general. That is not exactly a secret.
Right, and we should point out that they are not the sole, if it, turns out that other countries are promoting this misinformation or, creating it, they are not the only ones. We've seen other people on the ground, even good old North Carolinians, putting up some comments about the relief efforts that are either false or lacking context and things like that. So no one's saying, we tweeted this story out and someone said, "Oh, you're blaming Russia again." And it's like, no, we can create our own mess. Thank you.
A lot of people are doing this for free.
That's right. But our adversaries would love to help us.
Exactly. Well, and on I guess a more positive note, trying to fight this, you also wrote a story about what former Governor Pat McCrory is doing to try to fight some of this lower trust in elections, specifically among conservative voters.
Right. He joined a group called Right Count, and it's a nonprofit, and they've launched, I guess you could say, efforts in, I think it's 6 or 7 swing states, including North Carolina. And their goal is to be a resource for election skeptics. And as you know, former Governor Pat McCrory is a Republican. He went through his own close election back in 2016 when he lost to Roy Cooper by about 10,000 votes. And he and his campaign investigated, and he didn't concede until about a month later.
Well, and his campaign launched a lot of false allegations of voter fraud against North Carolina voters in that election.
Right. And so he's been there. If you talk to him, which I did for this story, he's learned a lot about the voting process, about how what the requirements are to vote, how votes and ballots are tabulated, what happens after you put your ballot in that machine, where it goes, who has access to that machine, and things like that. And so there are a lot of election integrity groups that are highly skeptical of the elections board and are quick to point out flaws. This group, Right Count, is trying to position itself as sort of as a group that cares about election integrity, but tries to promote good information, quality, well-researched information about how the election happens, and then on election night, what is happening. Is it good or bad? Is it expected or not? And so that's what McCrory is trying to do.
Meanwhile, overnight Thursday, we got a ruling in a lawsuit in which the Republican Party, both the state Republican Party and the National Republican Party, had sued the State Board of Elections, basically making false claims of voter fraud and double voting and flaws in the system here that the State Board had already investigated, voted to dismiss it unanimously. And that means that both Democrats and Republicans found that there was nothing to those complaints. Even though that happened with a unanimous vote, the state and national Republican parties sued the Board of Elections, parroting those same kind of claims and trying to get 225,000 North Carolina voters kicked off the voter rolls here in North Carolina right before the election.
And then what happened?
And then I should note, a Trump-appointed judge shot that down Thursday night. He said, I cannot grant you this thing. I cannot kick these 250,000 people off the rolls. He said that it would be basically counter to democratic governance in North Carolina for me to do this. It would harm democracy if he were to basically say that, okay, even though state law gives this duty to the Board of Elections and they have already investigated this and found nothing, if, I, a judge, am going to override them based on the word of private citizens, that is not how democracy works. And so he shot this down. Democrats have been over the moon with the fact that it was a Trump judge who signed that ruling. We heard from the Harris campaign, who was involved in this lawsuit on the side of the Board of Elections, saying that it just points to, the completely baseless accusations that, aren't just being made by, one-off activists or fringe groups, being made by the National Republican Party, by the state Republican Party. And I've reached out to the NCGOP to get comment on the judge's assertion that their request is anti-democratic. They have not responded.
Right. I imagine, now this is one of many lawsuits that either local Republicans or the national Trump campaign or Republican apparatuses filed here in North Carolina about the voting rolls. And I would imagine that they would say, hey, we're trying to make the election as clean as possible. That would mean that people who are not eligible to vote or who registered or wrongly registered should be kicked off. Obviously, their arguments have not held up in court, but that's one thing that Trump and his supporters have been doing here in North Carolina and other swing states is, testing the reliability of the voter rolls and of the vote. So we're probably going to see even more of that.
Exactly. And we should note for people who don't know the process, the Elections Board goes through very regularly and scrubs people from the voter rolls, does these purges. They announced just a couple of weeks ago that they had purged, it was close to 750,000 voters from the rolls here in North Carolina in the year or so leading up to the election. And that's, people who died, people who moved to another state, people who got convicted of a felony and lost their right to vote. This lawsuit wanted to purge another 225,000 on top of those 750,000 based on basically claims that the state doesn't do a good enough job ensuring that people aren't registering to vote twice. And from what we've heard from the State Board of Elections and now from this judge, there's just not the evidence there to support that claim. On that note, let's take a quick break. We will come back. We will talk about Mark Robinson, his $50 million defamation lawsuit against CNN, and a couple of the other down ballot races for our executive branch offices we should be paying attention to. Stay tuned. And we're back. Thanks for listening to The Wrap. I am Will Doran here with my colleague Paul Spey. We are some WRAL state government reporters who have been covering this Mark Robinson lawsuit against CNN, based on its bombshell report from about a month ago, making allegations that Robinson had made a number of racist and sexually explicit and just generally offensive comments on the messaging board of a pornographic website. Robinson has throughout said that this is all false. In fact, even before the CNN story came out, he put out a video saying, hey, CNN is about to put this story out and it's going to be false. So he has been consistent the entire time that the reporting is false. CNN has stood by its reporting, saying we have tied him to this username on this site in so many different ways. The same username on the site was also the username that he used on his public Twitter page, that were used on Pinterest and YouTube pages that appeared to be his, that had been used on other sites that used his name, his photo, his biographical information. And they even went back and tracked down some Facebook posts that Robinson had made that had kind of strange or unique phrases, and found a lot of those same phrases in this porn site comments. Robinson, in his lawsuit we've now seen, says CNN should have known that all of that stuff was public and someone could have hacked my email and basically faked these comments, and even could have...
These comments from a decade ago.
From a decade ago, before he was in public office. Could have faked them and could have used AI or something else to copy the way that he talks and make it look like it was him. Now, his lawsuit doesn't offer any sort of theory as to who would have done that or why someone would have done that long before he was ever a public figure or in politics. But that is the claim he's making. And, you know, if there is proof, more could come out in the discovery process as this rolls on. But we talked to a few lawyers who had some questions about how discovery process might go, including Attorney General Josh Stein. I asked him about this lawsuit, and he kind of giggled a little bit and said, I look forward to discovery. So what is discovery? Explain this to us.
Right. Well, that's where parties can sort of force each other. You know, if I was suing you, I could say, all right, Will, give me your computer. Like, you know, if this was about what was on your computer and what I reported about you, I can say, give me your computer data, and I can say, Will, have you ever been on a porn site? Have you ever visited this porn store? Have you ever watched this type of porn? Have you, you know, and it can be exhausting and searching. And
you'd have to testify under oath.
That's right.
To answer those questions.
There's no way out. You know, in criminal trials, you know, people don't have to testify against themselves. But in civil cases like this, that's not the case. And so I spoke with several attorneys. Some of them said there are people who have wanted to bring lawsuits in the past against someone they thought defamed them, but they did not want to go through discovery. And that's because it is very invasive. It is very invasive. And so when Josh Stein quips that, oh, this ought to be interesting, that's why. And we should also point out that defamation suits are extremely difficult to prove. Not only do you have to prove that the information was inaccurate, you have to prove that, in this case, CNN and Louis Money, the former employee of a porn store who has been talking about, you know, how Robinson allegedly used to visit all the time, Robinson has to prove that they know their information was false and they published it or talked about it anyway. That is hard to do.
And with malice as well.
That's right, with the intent of intentionally bringing him down. And so you may wonder, well, what was in Robinson's lawsuit? It was 16 pages that he filed this week. I for one, I haven't covered a defamation suit before. I wondered, you know, before they started talking at this press conference, will this lawsuit, you know, track down who the poster was? You know, did they find an IP address that was traced to someone else? That's what I would expect to see. That's not what we have here. And we spoke with one of the attorneys who successfully sued InfoWars and their founder, Alex Jones, for his false reports about Sandy Hook Elementary when it was shot up in 2012. And let me give you his quote. He says, "I didn't see anything in the complaint that suggested to me this case is likely to be successful." So that's what we have. That's sort of been the impression of people who read it just on the outset. Now, in the discovery process or in depositions where you can force someone to answer your questions, maybe more comes out. But at this point, on its face, the lawsuit does not disprove CNN's report.
Yeah, if this goes through discovery, Robinson and his team of attorneys would be really hoping to find some sort of smoking gun in CNN's documents. Maybe it's an email between a couple of reporters or producers who are saying mean things about Mark Robinson, or maybe it's
the Democratic Party.
The Democratic Party.
How did the CNN reporter even know to look in this? They would love to know that, I'm sure.
Exactly, but the risk you take to try to get that information is you also open yourself up to pretty invasive questions. Invasive was the term that multiple people used when describing how this process would be. So, I think there are some questions as to whether or not this case will continue on, and especially depending on the outcome of the election.
One thing they all said, and that's important to note, is that Robinson is obviously filing this lawsuit in hopes that it signals to his supporters and other voters that these comments are not his, and that he's going to fight them, and that you shouldn't believe the CNN reporting. Well, the attorneys we spoke to said in the lawsuit itself will not shake loose any new details before the election. So
that's a great point to make.
It's possible more details come out, maybe in the media, maybe, who knows how. But through this process of suing, we will not see new details come out before, November 5th, because it's not set up the court system is not set up that way. Defendants, including that former porn store employee and CNN, have at least 30 days to respond. Well, that's 10 days past Election Day. So not only do they have this cushion that they can wait out the election and then address it up to 10 days later at least.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point. Robinson clearly thought that it was important to get this out there before the election, but we are highly unlikely to learn any new details until after the election.
Right. Just by filing the lawsuit, he will not shake loose any new details before November 5th.
Right. Let's talk about some other races, not just the governor's race. One candidate who Democrats have been trying to tie to Mark Robinson is Michele Morrow. They have called both of them extremists, and this week we saw Michele Morrow send out an email to supporters calling for war and a new American revolution if she does not win the race for school superintendent. And
we should pause here and give a little glimpse into our process. This was posted not by Morrow herself initially, correct? Mm-hmm. It was posted by someone else who included a sign-off of Michele Morrow's name. So when we saw this, I think it's important for audiences to know we don't report on that immediately and take it at face value. We spent the day trying to figure out if it was authentic because, in theory, someone could have created that message to make Morrow look bad, a Democrat or some other critic or whoever.
Right. Could have been photoshopped. It could have been sent out by someone who wasn't actually with her campaign.
Right. Exactly. It could have been a supporter of hers that thought, that just wanted to write something, a message on her behalf or whatever. So we spent the day trying to figure out if this was authentic.
Exactly. And at first, the Morrow campaign denied it and said, this doesn't sound like her. This doesn't sound like something that we would say. But then later, they came back. Our colleague, Emily Walkenhorst, did a lot of the reporting on this. They came back and they said, okay, yeah, that was us. We did send that after it was confirmed that it was actually from her.
And now today we're Friday, the day after, Morrow, I believe, held a press conference to talk about it.
Right. And so she is now acknowledging it. And she said that even though she did call for war and for revolution, she wasn't talking about physical violence. Democrats have said this is from someone who was at January 6th, Morrow has said that she didn't go inside the Capitol, but she was there. And, there are plenty of photos of her, at least nearby at the time. And, this is not the first time that, she has called for, potential extra legal means of responding to an election result.
Right. And so Morrow is in this tight race with Mo Green, the Democratic candidate for this position. You may have seen her in attack ads that Mo Green and the Democrats have put out. A lot of people are trying to tie other Republicans to Mark Robinson and Michele Morrow because they've made controversial statements, whether it was about the past election or about abortion or things like that. In this case, she had some explaining to do that she did today.
Exactly. And then one final race I wanted to talk about, our colleague Brian Murphy has profiled the Attorney General's race. That story is going to be publishing over the weekend, probably on Sunday, so keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a really interesting read comparing the candidates Jeff Jackson and Dan Bishop. This is a race that a Republican has not been elected Attorney General in North Carolina in 125 years. There was one who was appointed, I think, at some point in like the 60s or the 70s. But that's it for the GOP in terms of being the Attorney General. It's been all Democrats. And the AG's office is a key stepping stone to higher office. The last 5 AGs have all run for governor, including Roy Cooper and Josh Stein. And going back to the 60s, every single Attorney General has run for either governor or U.S. Senate. So this is clearly a launch pad for higher office and is going to set up whoever wins, Jeff Jackson or Dan Bishop, to maybe be the next governor or be the next U.S. senator or have some other high profile role if they so choose, which for decades the AG has always chosen to do.
Right. Not to give too many details of Brian's story away, but if I could tease it a bit, you have someone in Dan Bishop is a congressman. And he was in the legislature before that. But he's an outspoken member, I think, of the Freedom Caucus, if he's still part of that. He's sort of this classic Republican, and people around here, people in politics tell us this is the first serious Republican that has put up like a decent campaign for this and has a shot at winning in years, like you say. Bishop is considered like a serious candidate. He has hired some good people to his campaign. They expect to win. Meanwhile, you have Jeff Jackson, who was also in the legislature, now in Congress. Now he was drawn out. He is not running for re-election over there because his district, because of the way it was redrawn. But he's younger. He's sort of someone who appeals to the younger generation through his TikTok videos and his other social media, and which he's good at. And so it's a really interesting contrast in styles that people can read about.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting race to watch with a lot of big implications for the state in years to come because, races or offices like the lieutenant governor don't really have much power in North Carolina. The attorney general has a ton of power. So, if there's any race that, people haven't really been paying attention to and, you're an undecided voter who's not just going to vote straight party line, that's definitely one to watch out for and learn something about the candidates because that is something that has a lot of impact here in our state. I think that's it for us on The Wrap today. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next time.